must have been cold there in my shadow to never have sunlight on your face. You were content to let me shine, that's your way. You always walked a step behind. So I was the one with all the glory.
Yeah, I'm Bill Johns. I'm a colleague, oceanographer colleague of Bob's. And Pat requested that we have a memorial mooring go down in the bottom of under the Gulf Stream, kind of for Bob to be watching over all of us from out there in the blue water where he loves. His nickname was Blue Water Bob. So we built this for him, not me, but the technicians in my mooring group. I put these kind of things out for real with current meters and stuff on them. So we just have a little plaque with some pictures and remembrances and a NOAA flag, an American flag, and we'll go out tomorrow hopefully and drop this in the deep waters of the Gulf Stream, and it'll be there for decades, probably. So Bob worked for NOAA, U.S. government. Of the kind of anchors we use on real oceanographic moorings, we usually make stacks of railroad wheels weighing like 3,000 to 4,000 pounds. So this is a mock-up of what that looks like. So that'll hold it down on the bottom. Stay on the bottom like a regular anchor. And this buoy just holds it up so it's vertical and not laying on the bottom.
So how many feet of water do you plan on putting it in?
Much deeper than this, about 300 feet. So it'll be only 10 feet tall down on the bottom of 300-foot ocean.
And then you'll take the coordinates so you'll know where it is.
Yep. We did one of these for a good friend and colleague of mine as well as Bob's a number of years ago. So this is kind of the second one of these we're doing, and so we're going to put them pretty close together, like a little oceanographer mooring field out there. Well, Bob was there on the memorial cruise for the other one we did, right? So he saw something like this go in for his friend who had passed away, and Pat asked me to make this for Bob, so we did.
So this is actually a little less of a celebration because Bob loves celebrating everybody, his friends, his family, but he really wasn't into celebrating himself. So this is more of a symposium. And the symposium topic is Bob. So there'll be a bunch of family and friends that come up and talk about what made Bob such a wonderful friend, husband, father, scientist. And it's an honor for Jamie and I to stand up here. We were adopted by Pat and Bob with Mom after Eileen died. And coming into their family and sharing so many things with them really just enriched our lives. And Bob, as everybody who was privileged to be his friend know, Bob was the most dependable, reliable, loyal friend you could have.
As Melissa already said, he was fiercely loyal and unassuming. He showed up for the parties and always cleaned up the messes. The maid was always coming the next day. He enjoyed the trips, but was also always the one packing the boxes for anyone that was moving. Several of those moves were mine, several were Melissa's. So, his continued dependability and constant honesty were a rare find, and I think that's what everyone in this crowd could say, is that he was the most loyal and dependable person that a lot of us knew.
I'm going to start with George Little, who is not little at all.
Thank you all so much for coming. Bob would have absolutely hated all of this attention, but he would so appreciate everyone being here this evening. So Bob, wherever you are, and I believe you're watching, look back on today with pride in the family and friends assembled here today to celebrate your life and contributions, and perhaps to roast you a little bit as well. Bob had a great sense of humor, at least on occasion, and he would often joke in family occasions that when his time came and there would be a service like this, that the soundtrack from The Big Chill should be played. He got his wish, a little chillier here in Miami than we're accustomed to. The stars aligned many years ago when I met Bethany, the love of my life, and the stars brightened even further when I met Bob and Pat. I confess that being from a Southern family with more genteel ways of resolving family disputes, you all know what I'm talking about. I was a little unsettled when I first witnessed how Bob and Pat engaged in conflict resolution. And I was surprised by some of the words involved. But I soon came to realize what a loving family they were, and this was simply how a couple of Italian kids who had done well from Brooklyn handled things. After my own wonderful father, who's here today, Bob was truly a second father and loyal friend. And I quickly knew after dating Bethany that there was some magic between our two families. There was so much in common: shared values, experiences, the priority of family, education, and a good sense of humor. I knew something good was happening with the two families when on their first meeting, Bob and my father shared that despite their respective PhDs, neither used the title doctor, thinking it was too pretentious. And they shared humble but loving beginnings, highly successful careers, and a commitment to public service. On behalf of my own family, my mother and father, and my brother here today, I would like to thank Bob and Pat for all they did to support my grandmother. She and Bob had a special bond, just as he had with his own late mother, Connie, whom we all loved. On public service, Bob became an accomplished and renowned oceanographer, as we all know, authoring scores of important research articles, collaborating with scientists from around the world, and sailing on NOAA cruises to study the oceans. He became known as Bobby Buoy for all the measurement buoys he placed around the world, and I never let him forget it. He didn't talk about it much, but he was also a proud United States Marine, serving in the Marine Reserves during the Vietnam era. He once confided that he felt guilty that even though the U.S. Marine Reserves were never mobilized during the war, he was never himself called to combat in Vietnam like other young Americans. He would want me to express profound gratitude to all veterans and their families here today. I also admired Bob's love of the moment. He adored a great party on the dance floor, where he clearly prioritized enthusiasm over form. He relished the golden oldies, and he especially liked to throw out zingers at family meals and special occasions. If you weren't being teased unmercifully by Bob, that meant he probably didn't like you. I can tell you that I, for one, felt especially loved in that regard, and I know everyone here probably experienced that same level of affection at various points in time. We enjoyed some amazing experiences together: wine trips in Burgundy and Napa Valley, skiing in Sun Valley, doing all of Paris and Sicily, trips to London and parties in Euston, and many boating trips on Biscayne Bay, where I once learned as a result of Bob's driving how to get a boat off more than one sandbar. Perhaps my favorite was just over a year ago when Bob, with the help of a wonderful nonprofit in Sun Valley, I was able to ski with him, along with his grandsons, for his final runs. His proudest role in life was that of husband, father, and grandfather. Bob was not just a loving partner to Pat for over 50 years. He was her advocate and champion. Not that she ever really needed it, but he was. Bob and Pat were bonded like few others I've seen, and I know how he appreciated all she did for him in his final months and years. There has never been a more loving or caring partner, and never a more patient one. Bethany brought him unending joy beyond description. She was really his North Star. He loved her, supported her, encouraged her, and prodded her like a good father should when she needed it. He called her his turklet, and he was her turkey. I got over that, eventually found it to be somewhat adorable and endearing. That's how they sign cards and letters to each other and signifies their special and unusually named bond. And Bethany, I know that he will forever think that you were the most amazing daughter, mother, in person. To Everett and Camden, you've been blessed with 4 beautiful grandparents. From the day you were born, Bob in particular loved reading books to you, going to all your ball games, traveling with you, and seeing you become the incredible young men you are today. To Barkley, who's here somewhere on a leash. Barkley might very well be Bob's favorite family member. Thank you for being such a good canine friend to Bob these past few years. To Dorothy and his nieces and nephews, he loved you dearly. Bob, I could go on, but you really wouldn't want me to, so I'll conclude on 2 points. First, Bob, I owe you apologies for wrecking your car in Iowa, and for that being the first time you learned about my relationship with Bethany. I regret, despite consulting with Bethany about this choice, never asking for your blessing to marry her. And I regret not going to enough additional UPA Miami games together. Wahoo wah. Finally, to an incredible man, oceanographer, Marine, and sailor. Semper Fi, Bob. Fair winds and following seas. And Bob, rest well as you deserve it, knowing that we all have the watch.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Finley Matheson, and I've had the honor and privilege of knowing Bob for over 50 years. He was one of the first people I met when I got out of the Navy and came to live on Key Biscayne. And he was fascinating to me because he was a scientist. And not only that, he was brilliant and an intellectual, but he never wanted you to know that. He was a great conversationalist, and he was also a great listener, because he always actually cared what you had to say. And he was also generous, extremely generous. I would say generous to a fault. And I'd like to tell you about one of those faults. He and some colleagues were selling Christmas trees here on Key Biscayne, and they did it for the Key Biscayne Athletic League. And they had set up their booth, and after it was set up, Pat came and selected her tree. And Bob marked it sold and put it in the back. And as the day went on, a lot of the trees were sold, and towards the end of the day, a family came, and they just had to have Pat's tree. Well, Bob, being so generous, he decided he could sell it to this lovely family, which he did. So he took a similar tree home, and Pat kind of knew it wasn't the right tree, but she didn't say anything right away. They put it in the stand, and they put the lights on it. I don't know that they ever got the decorations on it. Then they went to bed. Well, Pat was smoldering. I mean, smoldering like Mount Vesuvius smoldering. In the middle of the night, she gets up and drags that tree out in the backyard, stand, lights and all. And I don't know what happened the next morning, and if I did, I probably couldn't repeat it. But in any event, life went on, and it was okay. Now, Bob and Pat's marriage, and I shouldn't laugh at that, but was filled with passion and love. But Pat didn't have the exclusivity on drama. Now, Pat and Bob were visiting us up in Maine one summer, and we went to an island offshore and to a restaurant where we were having dinner. And as the dinner proceeded, Bob wasn't feeling very well. And towards the end of the dinner, he was convinced he was having a heart attack. So we had to get in the boat, and this boat was built in 1900. It did not have GPS or a radar. The fog was so thick you couldn't see one boat length ahead of you. So I plotted a course and headed for the nearest town dock. Thank God George and Bethany were on board, and George was my radio operator, and he called the Coast Guard and arranged for an ambulance to be at the town dock. And when we got there, lo and behold, it was there. And Bob was whisked off to the hospital, where he spent the night. And the doctors assured him he was not having a heart attack, it was indigestion. But this was the first time he couldn't blame it on Pat. We are all very fortunate to have had Bob in our lives one way or another. I can tell you he enriched my life. And Bob, you were a great friend and a true gentleman. Thank you. Thank you all.
I've got the wind at my back. I'm Raina Fine, and I'm a professor emerita at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School, a colleague and a friend of Bob, to Pat, to Bethany, to Camden, to Everett, and to George, and all of Bob's friends and family. Please accept my deepest sympathy and my friendship. Bob was a beacon to his colleagues in the ocean atmosphere community. At NOAA, the huge organization that NOAA was, at the Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Lab, affectionately known as AOML, and across the street at the University of Miami. He was a bright spot, which drew attention to ideas that were used to navigate around a lot of obstacles to understanding the role of the ocean in climate change. Thank you to Bob's colleagues who are gathered here today from out of state, in particular Sylvia Garzoli, who Bob helped recruit to succeed him as director of the Physical Oceanographic Division. Doug Wilson, Chris Minen are some of the ones that I have seen. And thank you to as many colleagues from AOML who are here and the University of Miami. Bob, what a journey. From Brooklyn Tech to City College to PhD at Texas A&M to the director of the Physical Oceanographic Division and then senior scientist at the AOML lab. Bob was a really superb scientist. He authored well over 70 peer-reviewed publications, including co-authors, as you heard from George, from all over the world. Oh, do we remember the all-pervading questions that Bob would come up with, that he asked about our science. Help, that was vintage Bob. In the early 1980s, Bob included and funded me, also others, including the late Fritz Schott and Bill Johns, who designed the mooring that's going to be put out tomorrow. Bob funded us to participate in a program he initiated to study the subtropical North Atlantic deep circulation. The research was really one of the highlights that propelled my career, and I remain proud of the publications that came from it. The collaboration was a life changer for me, as it helped me overcome a lot of shyness and insecurities. I was a young woman in the early 1980s, one of 4 in the United States with a PhD doing research in physical oceanography at a university. Our dear friend Bob and colleague Sylvia Garzoli was one of the other 4 women. It meant so much to me to work with Bob, who was a genuine, decent person and who treated me as an equal colleague. To give you all a flavor of Bob, the person, and what Bob's mentoring meant to people, I'm going to read you 3 very short communications. First is an email to Pat from Professor Lisa Beal, a younger colleague at the University of Miami, and she writes to Pat, "I have very fond memories of Bob and yourself. You both brought so much warmth and welcome to our Miami oceanographic community. I felt seen and respected by Bob as a young scientist, even before I became a faculty person at Rasmus. That meant a great deal to a female oceanographer trying to prove herself in a man's world. I'll be raising a glass in his memory. He was a true and rare gentleman in our field." Next, an email from a colleague, Jay McCrary, a retired faculty at the University of Washington, and he writes, "I remember Bob with great fondness. I first met Bob shortly after I moved to Nova University, and I must have met Bob and Ans Lietma about the same time. The 2 guys were a slapstick duo, constantly feeding jokes to each other. It was great fun to be around them both. Bob was also co-author on one of my most popular papers." And last is a letter from Lee Torres. Her parents, I think, are here today, though Lee, thank you. Though Lee isn't. Lee is now a PhD scientist studying whales, I believe at the University of Oregon. Oregon State, pardon, okay. And Pat requested that I read her letter. Lee says, "When I was 12 years old, Bob was my first mentor and inspiration to study the ocean. The first person to tell me about climate change and the amazing things in the ocean. I stayed in touch with him for decades. He followed our blog. He was a kind and amazing person that changed my life. Bob is with all of us," she says, "even if you did not know him. I share this with you all so that you know the power of mentoring and inspiring the next generation. It is some of the most important work that we all do. Thanks for everything, Blue Water Bob." Well, we can't top that. So I will say, on behalf of all of our ocean atmospheric colleagues, I thank you, Pat, for your hospitality and repeatedly welcoming us graciously into your and Bob's homes. Maya Angelou reminded us, and these are her words, that I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Thank you, Bob, for being such an inspiration to us all.
Hello everyone, thank you all for coming. For those of you who don't know, I am Everett Little. I am Bob's grandson. When I first started writing this speech, I didn't really know where to go. I knew everyone else was going to talk about Bob, and probably say a bunch of traits about him that he would really disagree with because he was just that humble. And so I thought what I would do instead was share some of the experiences I had with him that really are vivid memories for a variety of different reasons. To start, I think I'm actually going to talk about something that Bob really hated, which was the Los Angeles Dodgers. For those of you who don't know, the Dodgers played in Brooklyn until 1958. I'm pretty sure Bob was a little bit heartbroken over the leaving, but he always loved the game of baseball, and I think some of that transferred to me. I still remember I went through a baseball history phase in elementary school. I could do the party trick where you tell me your birth year and I could tell you who won the World Series, how many games it went, and what the scores of each game were. I can't do that now, so please don't try. But this was at our home in Washington, D.C. I was eating breakfast and he was doing a crossword puzzle. And he looks over at me and goes, "Everett, do you think you can know a 1970s Oakland Athletics pitcher with a colorful last name?" I gave him the answer. His name's Vida Blue, for anyone who's wondering. And he just sort of turns back to me and goes, "That's pretty amazing." That was about the biggest compliment I've received from Bob, up to that point in my life. And, I've stuck with baseball ever since. I don't know if it's because of that, but it's probably a pretty big reason. And another thing that Bob and I shared was music and movies. I was staying with Bob and Alma about 2 or 3 years ago, and we decided that it would be a good idea to sit down and watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in one sitting. For those of you who don't know, that's a 3.5-hour long movie. It didn't go well, but the experience of doing it with him we both had a good time in the end. And to touch on, something my mother said earlier at a private service, he loved his music while he worked, and my mom swears it was witchcraft, but then she saw me doing it, and I definitely get it from him. I still remember walking down in this same summer of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Tim blasting Radio Gaga by Queen while writing a paper. I don't know how he does it. I do it now, though, because of him, and so I can thank him for that. I also like to talk about Alma here. I call her Alma. You all call her Pat. And to put it politely, they were very honest with each other. And my favorite example of this was my brother and I were getting picked up from the Ocean Club here in Key Biscayne. They were driving us back to their place, and they started to get honest with each other in the front seat, and they weren't paying attention to what was in front of them. And so there was one of those big parking arms that they had there. I don't know what you call them. But they kept driving even though it was coming down. And Camden and I watched in horror as it hit the top of the golf cart and got the car stuck. That was it was honest. It was very honest. But I like my dad said earlier, I think that honesty, it genuinely is honesty with each other, is important communication that I don't see in a lot of other relationships, if any. And so, I think that was thank you. So that was something that I thought was very special about you and Bob Alma, was your ability to communicate as a couple and work even when you disagreed, which was a lot. And then the final story, well, thank you. The final story I have, I was in 6th grade and I had some bullies, and I was visiting them. We were sitting in the parking lot to Albertsons, which is a grocery store in Sun Valley. And this is 6th grade, so I can't believe I remember this well. But I was asking him for advice on it, and he goes, well, I had some bullies in high school. It was like 4 to 5 guys who were mad at me for dating a girl in their neighborhood. They beat me up a few times, including at church after the service one time. That one really shocked me. And, you know, I asked him what he did, and he said, I didn't do much. I just sort of avoided them and focused on my own life. A few decades later, he met a man who was a police officer in that neighborhood, and he asked him what happened to those guys. The officer said they were all dead or in jail, and I think Bob won. And Bob seemed to win a lot. He won and for this, I actually thought of, for those of you who are familiar with Captain America, who was also raised in Brooklyn, also a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And there's a quote that I think sums up Bob's approach to life. Not in its entirety, but in essence, I could do this all day. Bob woke up, he got Alma, he had my mom, eventually he had me, my dad, and Camden, and at various points in his life, he had all of you. And he could do that all day. He loved being with every single person here. I think he wouldn't trade that for the shield with the star and the American flag on it. Thank you for coming out today. Like everyone else has said, he would have hated the ceremony, but I think he would have been happy to see all of you. Thank you.
I'm going to try to read really fast because I know it's cold. It's messing with all of us. Whenever we had family events, Mom was in charge of everything, and Dad was in charge of the weather. Well, thanks, Dad. Like parenting one's children, eulogizing one's father is simply an opportunity to fall short. So let's stipulate up front that my father was much more of a wonderful man, a wonderful person who made a bigger impact than I'll be able to portray in the next 5 minutes. But as you can tell, our family never met a microphone we didn't like, so I'm gonna give it a try. As Mom and I were planning for this celebration with you here tonight, we kept coming back to a phrase, a man ahead of his time. It resonated for both of us. Let me share some of the ways that Bob was ahead of his time. While many men want a wife to cook for them, Dad got one who cooked for everyone else. A lot of men might have been emasculated by a woman as strong and successful as my mom, but he was proud to be known all over town as Mr. Pat Molinari. Many of you know that he went to Texas A&M for grad school since he cheered for the Aggies and routinely made the traditional Aggie references to picking his nose. Although many of his Brooklyn friends in their early 20s were picking places to live close to home, he set off in his car with 2 loaves of bread and a pound of bologna for a school he'd never seen, not even on the internet, in a state he'd never visited, and that did not take kindly to New Yorkers. He went from there to Key Biscayne, never looked back. He was a man ahead of his time. Key Biscayne has a great history of fathers coaching their girls in sports. And my dad never thought twice about coaching or cheering me on in t-ball, soccer, or tennis, or anything else I wanted to do. He saw no limits for his daughter or for any other woman. It's taken me a lifetime to appreciate both how rare that was and how much it empowered me to dream big. His support of women wasn't limited to family. As you heard from Raina, he was always looking for ways to make sure women had the opportunities to lead in science that they deserved, a battle we still haven't won. His work itself was ahead of his time. Dad rarely went on about it, but I remember from childhood him patiently explaining to people the difference between weather and climate change. Weather and climate. Only now that climate change is bearing down on us every day can I appreciate the passion that drove him to spend all those hours with numbers on yellow legal pads, making charts and graphs to try to help the world see and understand something really important. He was ahead of his time. Back when travel was far more complex and you couldn't track your flight on your phone or check out your hotel on the internet, Bob wanted to see the world. And he did it. Whether he was water skiing on the equator, river rafting in Zimbabwe, skiing in New Zealand, dining in Paris, diving the Great Barrier Reef, my dad took every opportunity to experience new people and places. And that's something that's been a legacy for me and for his grandsons. And finally, my dad always had a very expansive view of family ahead of his time. Some people might think we had a small family, just me, mom, and dad. But Dad lived the mantra that friends are the family you choose. He loved to go out with the yacht club crew for a crazy 40th birthday party, a UM tailgate with tequila and tennis ball cans so you could sneak it into the stadium, the Farolero show, just Friday nighters. You were all his family. He adored my friends. And to the end, when we would talk, he would always ask me, "How are the Ransom girls doing? Tell me, how they doing?" Every time he came to visit me at Georgetown, we managed to have a lot more meetings at NOAA headquarters after I went to DC. He would take me and all my girlfriends out to dinner. He loved dancing at all of their weddings and welcoming them to Key Biscayne to visit us, all his family. The Rubens spent more time with my father in the past 2 years than almost anyone, living a lifetime of beautiful memories over countless dinners on the Sun Valley Tech. Linda and Lou actually are related to us through his beloved sister Dorothy, but they and all the wonderful nieces and nephews who came with them became part of the Molinari mashpacha. He didn't choose the littles either, but he could not have loved anyone more than George, Tom, Betty Mar, Michael, Janelle, and Ruby. He would have loved Crew too. Jamie and Melissa, alongside their loving husbands and children, were truly other daughters to him, and they gave him and my mother so much joy and support that I couldn't imagine having better sisters. And he even took a second wife from Germany, in Inga. His view of family was ahead of its time. To be clear, Bob could also be behind the times. He believed that music peaked in the 60s. He bragged that he had never changed a diaper. And he had a delightful but old-fashioned sense of chivalry. My father didn't believe in God. He believed in science and in people. He believed that it mattered how we treat each other. He believed that how we use our time on Earth should add value here, because this was the whole ballgame. One real upside is that he lived his life without any other North Star. Make the most of life. Be good to people. Leave the world a better place. And he did. Just like his beloved, sorry, I have tissues over there. Maybe you can hand me that one, Camden. Thank you. Just like his beloved Miami Hurricanes, Bob left it all on the field. So while I am deeply sad to have lost him, and I miss him so much, what I feel most today isn't grief, it's gratitude. Gratitude to have a father who was intelligent, curious, compassionate, adventurous, a generous tipper, an avid sports fan, a loving father, husband, and grandfather, a leading scientist, and a committed Democrat. Had to happen, right? Couldn't get away without a political reference. You're welcome. Gratitude to my mother, who laughed with him, danced with him, traveled with him, bickered with him, and always, from beginning to end, took fierce and loving care of him. For enabling him, I feel gratitude to each and every one of you for being a part of our life together, for enabling him to live his best life, because he really did live his best life, and it was a great life indeed. I'm glad we're here to celebrate that together. Thank you.
I'm here to talk about my life with Bob, an Italian-American love story. As you all know, a good marriage is full of passion, love, commitment, feistiness, and yes, more feistiness. Our marriage had an abundance of all of these. We certainly had our feisty moments, as you all heard. Fortunately, we would come to a meeting of the minds and love and understanding, and always made up with wonderful passion. Bob had true integrity, a great work ethic, commitment to his family, friends, and colleagues. His love for his work came right after his love for Bethany and me. He loved all sports. A friend of mine, when she came to visit us once when he was in Texas A&M, said, okay, now we've seen this, done that, do this. When do we get to play knock hockey? I mean, he just could not get over. He loved his sports. And any dessert. He couldn't do anything without rock and roll music. Of all the things that Bob enriched my life with was Bethany. He was truly a fabulous father. Bob loved to travel, discover a new adventure, new people, places, and all sorts of things. I love the same things, and he would include me whenever he had the opportunity. Most of all, Bob pushed me to know myself better and realize dreams that I did not know I had, all of which I could not have done without him. I should have known how our life would be after we had returned home from our honeymoon in Cozumel 54 years ago. We were back at Texas A&M. He came home from his office very excited, telling me that tomorrow I could go and take the swim test to qualify for the dive course at the university. Well, the next day I went, and Bob was already a certified diver, and I really wanted to be one too. So I had to swim 10 laps in an Olympic pool in 10 minutes. I had real doubts that I could do this. I was a decent swimmer, but hadn't done laps in years. So before the gun went off, I expressed my fear about not succeeding to Bob. He said, don't worry. Before you start, just hyperventilate, hyperventilate, hyperventilate. The gun went off, and I went in. The moment I started, Bob was running along the side of the pool, shouting, you can do it, you can do it. Keep going. Well, I did, but I would have quit halfway through if it hadn't been him, if he hadn't been there cheering me on. He pushed and cheered me on all of my life. I became a good businesswoman and achieved goals I wouldn't have reached. If Bob hadn't been there telling me I could do it, and when I would try to compliment him for all his support that he gave me, he was very humble and said, no, you did it yourself. He was the most humble human being I have ever met. He would always stand in the background. I would never have traveled all over the world, enjoying his business trips, sitting at oceanographic conferences, learning about things that improved my way of thinking. We did have a feisty, passionate, loving life together. He truly believed in supporting his family and friends. Recently, I was going through his desk. There was my next birthday card that he didn't get to give me. It was a picture of a bicycle, and on the front of the card it said, enjoy the ride. And we had quite a ride. He is sorely missed. He was truly the wind beneath my wings and my hero.
It must have been cold there walked a step behind. So I was the one with all the glory, while you were the one with all the strength. A beautiful face without a name for so long. A beautiful smile to hide the pain. Did you ever know that you're my hero? And everything I would like to be. I can fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings. It might have appeared to go unnoticed, but I've got it all here in my heart. I want you to know I know the truth. Of course I know I would be nothing without you. Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything I wish I could be. I could fly higher than an eagle. For you are the wind beneath my wings. Did I ever tell you you're my hero? You're everything, everything I wish I could be. Oh, night, I can fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings. 'Cause you are the wind beneath my wings. Oh, the wind beneath my wings. You are the wind beneath my wings. Fly, fly away. You let me fly so high. You, the wind beneath my wings. Oh, the wind beneath my wings. Fly, fly so high against the sky, so high I almost touch the sky. Thank you, thank God for you, the wind beneath my wings.
Hello everyone, I'm Camden Little. If you don't know, I'm Bob's other grandson. I just wanted to say like a few little things before we can get to dinner, because I know everybody's hungry and it's cold out here. Because just a few little things, because so many amazing things have been said about Bob that I would say, but that's not even everything amazing about him. So the first thing is that just overall, Bob was an amazing person, friend, husband, grandfather, and father to just all of us. Another thing is that he had a fabulous sense of humor, and I remember just every night we would sit outside on the deck in these past 2 summers in the Sun Valley with the Rubens, and we would sit around the table and we would be talking, and he would have what my dad calls the zingers, which is just like these sentences, and he would pop in and just say something, and we would all just start laughing. Hold on, sorry. The final thing is that he was a huge avid sports fan, and that I feel like that played into a big part of my life, because now I'm like an athlete and I follow sports, and I feel like that him being a sports fan played into that part of my life. So so I feel like he was one of the early influences who brought sports into my life. I remember being really young, and in Sun Valley or Florida, he would turn on a baseball game or football game, usually college football, and he would sort of just tell me what was going on, because I didn't really understand that much, especially baseball. And he would turn on Dodgers games, and he would tell me what was happening, and he would express that he wasn't too happy with the Dodgers. But that was just amazing. And Bob was a huge influence in all of our lives, and as my mom said, he would go by the fact that friends are the family you choose. So he would call all of you family, and thank you, family, for being here today, and thank you all so much for coming. And now let's eat.
Sogno all'orizzonte e mancano le parole. Sì, lo so che non c'è luce in una stanza quando manca il sole. Se non ci sei tu con me su le finestre, mostra tutto il mio cuore che è acceso. Chiudi dentro me la luce che ho incontrato per strada. Time to say goodbye. Paesi che non ho mai veduto e vissuto con te. Adesso sì li vivrò con te. Partirò sulla via per mari che io lo so, non esistono più. It's time to say goodbye.
Quando sei lontana sogno all'orizzonte e manca le parole. E io sì lo so che sei con me, tu mia luna, tu sei qui con me. Mio sole, tu sei qui con me, con me, con me, con me. Time to say